Hey guys, in this tutorial we're going to look at making this gold 3D text in Cinema 4D Lite. I've broken the tutorial down into 5 sections: making the 3D text, setting up the camera, making the gold material from scratch, how to get nice reflections on it using a HDRI, and making a infinity wall. Let's jump in. Okay, so here we are in After Effects, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and all we're going to do is go up to File, New, Maxon Cinema 4D file. That's going to ask you to save that. So that'll launch Cinema 4D Lite. Then we're going to come up to this pen icon, click down and say Text Spline. From there, we're going to go down into our Attributes tab and then click Object. And here we can edit the text. So let's put gold. Let's change up the font. I'm going to choose this. And let's center that alignment. So at this point, we're just looking at a spline, which you can kind of think of like the pen tool, but without a stroke on it. So we can't see this render in the export. Now, if we want to add some geometry, we just go up to this little hollow box, click once, that'll make an extrude. And all we need to do is make that text spline a child of the extrude. And you can see that's extruded out. Now, I usually take the offset to a negative number, so it's kind of coming out the back. And it's up to you how deep that is, but I'm going to put mine around 40. Let's add a bit of rounding to the edges of the text. So just need to come to this caps, drop down and go to bevel. And as you can see, as we pull that out, we're kind of getting a bevel on the edge there. I'm going to keep this quite small, maybe 4 centimeters will do. And to navigate around our scene, we can just use these icons up at the top right hand corner. So that's pan, zoom and orbit. Or you can hold and click and drag on the 1, 2 or 3 keys. 1, click and drag, that pans us. 2, click and drag is zoom in, and 3 is orbit. They're definitely the most useful shortcuts to know. So from here, let's frame this text up and add a camera. So I'm just going to go to this camera icon, making sure I'm seeing through it by checking this little box. And then using the 1, 2 and 3 keys and clicking and dragging, I'm going to orbit round with the 3, zoom in with the 2 and pan with the 1. Frame it up something like this. I think we could also change the focal length. Obviously, if the longer focal length, we're going to squash the text, and a wider focal length will make it kind of feel a bit bigger. So let's bring this 36 on the focal length to about 19 and zoom ourselves in here. And I think something like that looks good. So let's go ahead and make that gold material. I'm going to go down here to our material manager, which is this box down here, which is empty at the minute. If we double click, it will create a material. If we double click that, it will open up the material editor. And obviously a lot of options here. We're going to just concentrate on reflectance, so turn off color. And we're also going to remove this one. This is default specular, which is a kind of fake reflectance. Go add Beckman, which will create this kind of silver. Then all we need to do is go down to layer Fresnel and choose conductor. And then where it says custom, let's choose gold there. And that'll give us our gold color. So I'm going to close that material editor down, and to get it onto our text, all we need to do is click and drag and drop it on like that. One thing to note is what we're looking at now is almost a draft render. So we need to actually look at the final thing. And to do that while we're kind of moving around our scene, we're going to use something called the interactive render region. If we go up to this little play icon, drop down, interactive render region, and that brings up a box which we can kind of extend out, and we can start to see our scene as it will be when it's rendered. There's a little slider here, which is a quality control. Obviously, higher quality, the slower it is. At the moment, it looks a bit odd. We can't really see our text. This is because our reflectance is almost at 100%. So it's like holding up a mirror in a dark room. If there's nothing around it to reflect off, no lights or surfaces, then it's not going to reflect anything. So to fix that, we're going to use something called an HDRI, which is almost like an environment for our scene to sit in. So if we come up here to this little grid kind of icon, click there and add a sky. Now we can see our text. It's obviously just reflecting this grey at the moment, which is not very interesting. So to make it look a bit more natural, we want a kind of more natural background for it to be reflecting. So if we go up to Window and Asset Browser, in here we can type HDRI. Some of these are offline, but some of them you should see be available to the lite version. If not, I'm going to drop a few of them into the project files, which you can download. There's a link in the description below this video. I'm going to take this one here and drop it onto our sky, which is basically our background. As you can see, that looks much more natural. We're kind of getting some nice highlights and some nice reflections there off the text. So I'm actually going to add a background to this, but if you did want to render this out without having to see this HDRI kind of background, all you need to do is go up to the sky, right click and say render tags, compositing, and then scene by camera. You can turn that off and that background will disappear. Remember to save that if you want to see an update in After Effects. Let's jump back and see where we got to. We've got this Cinema 4D file here, and I'm just going to drop that into a new composition. This is also a bit of a draft render at the moment, so you use this Cineware plugin to just change this to current, and you can see the final result there. So one little change I'm actually going to do as I remember. So as standard, it opens in a lower resolution, so we can change this to 1920, 1080, and all we need to do is save that, drop that into a composition, and now that's full HD. Okay, cool. So back on over to Cinema 4D Lite, and let's create a kind of infinity background, which is quite easy to create. All I'm going to do is kind of come out of this camera view, so we save that shot just by clicking that. We can actually get rid of this interactive render region. It's just going to kind of slow us down. So first thing we want to do is create a plane. Scale that up a little bit. We can go to the width and the height. Just scale that up. And we obviously want to bend this. So we can use something called a bend deformer, which is just under this little tag. Go bend, and that needs to actually be a child of the plane for it to work. So now that's a child, we can increase the strength slightly. Obviously that's bending the wrong way. So if we go down to our coordinates, I always get this wrong, but last one I tried. So on the bank, we can change that to minus 90, sorry. And then we can also rotate it on the heading by minus 90 as well. And then just shift that back and increase. So if I zoom out here, you'll be able to see what I'm doing a little better, and just increase that strength. You can see we're getting kind of what we want here. If you actually turn on, go to display and garage shading with lines, you can see what's happening. This is bending on these segments. So obviously we need more segments for it to be nice and smooth. So if we go to the plane, and we add some height segments there. We don't actually need the width segments because we're not bending that way, so we can get rid of them, and something like that looks good. I'm actually going to just bring this in like this. Cool, so if we want to see that from our camera perspective, just click that little icon. Obviously we're getting some intersections there. We can either bring the plane down or the text up. I'm going to bring the text up here till they're kind of sitting flush. Obviously we don't want this empty space here, so we can just move that along and use these little yellow handles just to extend that backdrop, something like that. So we need a material for that backdrop. I'm just going to double click in the material manager to make a new one. Drop that onto our backdrop. Then I'm going to go double click onto it and say we get rid of the reflectance there. And let's put some luminance in, which is going to kind of whitewash the whole thing. We're going to do a little bit of a blend between the luminance and the color. So that's this brightness slider here, something like that. Obviously we need to be in our interactive render region to see the final result. So at the moment we're getting this kind of nasty shadow here, and that's because of our HDRI. So one thing we can do is add a light for the backdrop. I'm going to again come out of this camera view. I'm going to go up to this light bulb and say area light. That'll add a light there. As you can see, it's kind of lighting up our backdrop a bit. We can use these handles again to kind of make it a bit bigger. And if we hit R on our keyboard, we get this kind of rotation handles. You can just tilt that and then position it as we want. So we jump back to our camera view. You can see that's helped clear up that a bit. We're obviously getting some really strong highlights on the top of our text, but we can change that intensity, maybe bring it up even more. Too much. And then we don't actually need this illuminating our text, so we could go to the light options, go to project, and we can actually exclude or include certain objects within our project. So let's exclude the text and the extrude, so chuck that in there. You see those nasty highlights disappear, and that's looking a lot better. And if you're not happy with some of these highlights on your text, you can go to the coordinates of the sky, which has got our HDRI on it, and just play around with that, play around with the rotation, which is actually going to kind of rotate the whole scene around the text. So you can see that's darker. Make sure you're in the kind of interactive render region for this so you can see it update. That's quite cool. So another thing you might want to look at is kind of making this render look a little sharper. So if we go up to this cog icon here and we go into anti-aliasing, make sure geometry is on best, and then the threshold, the lower it is, the kind of better. So we can change this to 5, and you'll see that that kind of cleans up some of those edges. You can save that, go back to After Effects to have a look. Make sure you're in current to see the final result. Might take a minute longer because now we're kind of adding a lot of effects. So one thing you might see is that it doesn't feel very grounded. There's no shadows or anything like that. And one thing we can add is something called ambient occlusion, which is kind of like if you look in between your fingers, that shadowing when two objects are close to each other. So if we jump back to Cinema 4D Lite and go to this little cog icon, which is our settings, then we can go to Effect, Ambient Occlusion, and instantly you can see there's some kind of shadowing underneath the text there. It might just be floating just above our plane. So just make sure that's nice and flush with the ground there. So let's save that, jump back to After Effects to see that update. And from here, we can render it out just like any other After Effects project. Well, I hope you found that useful. If you did, please consider giving it a like and subscribe, really helps with the channel. And if you're just getting started with 3D, check out some other videos on this channel or click the link in the description below to get the free course on Cinema 4D Lite.